Vantor, delivering sovereign spatial intelligence that gives nations the ground truth.
Hello and welcome back. I have a bit of domestic travel coming up, and so I'm recording this podcast a day ahead of when I normally schedule them. So if any world events have happened by the time you hear this that I haven't commented on, that's exactly the reason why. So the Middle East remains confused, so there's not a lot I can productively say about that. And no one in the US Trump administration seems to have a clue about what they are doing. The government of Israel has clearly lost its collective mind, and more than ever seems to believe that the solution to any problem is to drop more bombs. On top of that, the situation inside Iran remains totally opaque. Bottom line, no one knows when this is going to end, and it might well be that Donald Trump has lost interest because, contrary to what many were predicting, the world economy has not yet crashed, though there's still a chance it will. There are only a few certainties. Iran has not surrendered unconditionally. It retains significant asymmetric military capabilities, and if anything, the hardline Islamic Republic has probably strengthened its grip on power. So all those Australian politicians who cheered on the US and Israeli bombing campaign, I hope you're happy with the results. Last week I did my best to explain that in geopolitical terms, Australia is completely isolated in the entire Indo-Pacific as the only country adopting this pro-US, pro-Israel position. Though, to be fair, the government has tried to walk this back. I have to say this for the record, even though I mentioned this last week, telling the US in particular that the need for further military action is over. And that's even though none of the main objectives have been met. Now, very much related to this, international trust in the US has collapsed, and this is according to a very critical new poll conducted by the Pew Research Center. It's an extremely reputable organization. They have a long history of accurate polling. And for this one, they surveyed more than 42,000 people in 36 countries between February and May, finding an overwhelmingly negative response to Trump around the globe. And overall, the poll found 76% of adults questioned had no confidence in Trump's leadership on the world stage, with just 23% having confidence. It's strange to think that there's 1% who are undecided. The countries with the lowest opinion of Trump included Turkey, with 92% of those polled having no confidence in the president to do the right thing on world affairs, followed by Sweden at 89% and Mexico 88%. On the other part of the ledger, and I don't know why really this is the case, Trump was most popular in the Philippines. 68% could be that the Philippines is coming under a huge amount of pressure from China over maritime border issues. And here's one that is now out of date. Pew found that in Israel, Trump had a popularity rating of 66%. As I mentioned last week, that has dramatically, suddenly reversed, with Trump apparently giving in to Iran. And again, I have to use the word apparently because these things can shift pretty quickly, now being okay with Iran having ballistic missiles, and also being open-minded certainly about Iran keeping their nuclear material and maybe even having some sort of civil nuclear program. So that figure needs to be updated. And another country where Trump has a high approval rating is Nigeria. 65% approve. No idea why. Now, Australia was included in this Pew survey report, and in 2022, 79% of people saw the US as a reliable ally. That's now down to 37%. Obviously, big drop from more than 2/3 to now about 1/3. And the mirror corollary of that is in the same year, 2022, only 20% of Australians distrusted the US, but that has now jumped up to 63%. But I'd have to say, on the domestic front, political front, both the government and the coalition seem immune to this trend. I can't understand why, and I'll come back to that. Anyway, let's continue with Pew's research. Okay, as well as this high level of distrust, 77% of those surveyed disapproved of his aggressive tariff policies, with just 18% believing it was the right thing to do. And Pew has concluded that the numbers are similarly negative for several other global issues in which Trump has heavily involved himself. In terms of his handling of the Russia-Ukraine war, 72% disapprove, while only 20% approve, while his designs on Greenland were approved by just 14%, 14% of those surveyed, and disapproved by 68%. A few people there in the middle undecided. And Trump's clash with Venezuela, which saw the capture of former President Nicolas Maduro early this year, was approved by only 22% and disapproved by 63% of people. Now, this Pew survey is very much mirrored by one conducted in Australia, purely in Australia, by the Lowy Institute. They do a yearly poll of trust factors, and their 2026 poll has found that, no surprise, trust in the US has fallen dramatically, largely driven, they say, by unease surrounding the Donald Trump administration or the behavior of the Trump administration. And the US remains slightly ahead of China in terms of trust. I think it's 31 people think that the US is trustworthy. Only 28% believe the same is true of China, but the Lowy authors of the poll say this represents the narrowest trust gap recorded in the poll's history. And in slightly contradictory fashion, 63% of Australians still think the US alliance makes Australia safer, and almost exactly the same percentage also believe the US will come to Australia's aid if there's a conflict with China. Now, people might be tempted to just look at those raw numbers and say, well, clearly support for the US alliance, and by inference, AUKUS is absolutely rock solid. Well, I look at it a slightly different way, and I'm not being critical of those numbers. They are just the numbers. But when you have the government and the opposition and just about all of the mainstream media continuing to boost AUKUS and continuing to boost the US alliance, I am frankly amazed that more than a third of Australian people don't think that the US alliance makes Australia safer. And again, just by simple maths, 1/3 of Australians don't believe the US will come to Australia's aid if there's a conflict with China. And that's with all of this massive political and media cheer squad behind the US alliance. It tells me that there is a significant minority of people who have grave doubts about what is going on, and probably, going on those numbers, feel that they are being misled. Now, I've mentioned that I also rely on podcasts for a lot of my information, and during the week I was hopping around to the various sites that I regularly go to, and I was listening to some commentary from the American conservative commentator Bill Kristol. Many people might have heard of him. Bill Kristol is a very experienced hand. He's a Republican. I think it's fair to say that he's probably a never-Trumper, but nevertheless, he does come very much from the conservative mainstream in the US. And he was commenting that, anecdotally, the only other politicians who really like Trump are the world's tyrants, those in the Middle East and Central Asia, and formerly characters like Viktor Orban in Hungary. And he was making the point that no one reputable these days really feels close to Trump or even particularly wants to be associated with him. And of course, that made me reflect, well, rather nastily, I have to say, again, on Anthony Albanese, our Prime Minister, and his claims that he's close to Trump. And that was sort of reflected by our new ambassador to Washington, Greg Moriarty, who told the media that after his meeting with Donald Trump, during that meeting, Trump had reflected favourably on Anthony Albanese. Myself being seen as a close friend of Donald Trump's, I'm not sure that I would want to be in that space, but that's just me being nasty. Anyway, getting back to research and information and tables, I also came across some very interesting reading about growth in military expenditure, or, well, to be more precise, percentage changes in military expenditure from the year before. And this survey was conducted in 2025, so it's quite current. The website is called Visual Capitalist. I haven't come across them before, but they appear to be reputable. And again, from the cross-checking that I've been able to do on the information, it does appear to be accurate. Now, I'm going to read out countries and numbers, but to frame this is, of course, our government's continuous insistence that Australia is spending record amounts on defence, that we're in a period of unprecedented ramp-up, that from a budgetary financial point of view, we are just doing so much. Okay, now, boosters of the government will, I'm sure, be surprised by this table. And it won't take me long to run down the list. I'll do a little bit of commentary as I go. On the top of the list is Spain. And the previous year, their annual change in military spending was an increase of 49.5%. This huge lift. Now, that makes sense because, of course, Spain for decades has been underperforming. And they have finally got the message, and so, yes, they are lifting their expenditure. Australia, this financial year, we're actually going slightly backwards. Now, realising the sensitivity of ministers like Defence Industry Minister Pat Conroy, I will add in the qualifier that the small shrinkage in our spend is because we moved some money forward into the previous financial year. Anyway, Spain up by 49.5%, Australia going slightly backwards. Norway, almost the same, 49% increase. And again, that's the combination of the Russia threat and the US starting to pull out of Europe. Norway, country of 4 million people, in dollar terms, it's not an earth-shattering amount, but in terms of their economy, their level of commitment, it's huge, 49% increase. Sweden, 24% increase in their defence budget. Again, relatively small country, only 10 million people, but in percentage terms, it's a huge further commitment. Big one. Germany, a 23.9% increase from the year before. Germany is really, really rearming. I've made this point before. They are serious about it. They have huge industrial capacity. They are the biggest economy in Europe. They are the world's third largest economy, and their defence expenditure went up by 23.9%. Poland, 23.4%. No surprise there. Poland has been ramping up military expenditure for about the last 4 years because they are desperately worried about the threat from Russia. Canada's a good one. Five Eyes country, obviously, partner with Australia. Canada, that they are now in a period of profound uncertainty because they believe they have been ditched by the United States. They increased defence expenditure by 22.6%. Italy, 20.1%. Ukraine, 19.7%. Netherlands, 14.5%. Taiwan, 13.8%. Brazil, 12.8%. Algeria, 10.6%. Singapore, 10.3%. Japan 9.7, India 8.9, China 7.4, Turkey for the old school people, 7.2%, Russia 5.9%. Guess who is then next on the list? Australia. This again is the previous financial year, a 3% increase over the year before. I mean, folks, this is nothing at all like the ramp up that is occurring in so many other countries. And I might also say, in the same context, the UK actually in the same period went slightly backwards. They had a reduction of about 2%. Israel, also a slight reduction. That might just be a budgetary quirk. I mean, Israel is armed to the teeth. And even the United States actually went backwards. But again, Trump and the Republicans are trying to fix that with a vast increase in defense expenditure from the current 1 trillion to about 1.5 trillion. It'll be interesting to see how much of that gets through Congress. So bottom line, I mean, the government can insist that defense expenditure is going up. Yeah, we've discussed this before, but it's an extremely modest amount. We are not ramping up nearly as fast as that very long list of countries that I've read out. And so once again, there is a profound mismatch between the rhetoric that continues to come from the government about the uncertain times that we're in and threats to Australia and what we're actually doing about it. Now, in that context, and I'm conscious of the fact that I'm hopping around some topics, but I randomly came across some worrying information from US sources about F-35 capability, the Joint Strike Fighter. Australia has 72 of them. I've written positively in the past about something called the Block 4 upgrade, which is a major improvement, a sort of midlife improvement to the capability of the aircraft with a lot of new sensors. But the reports that I've seen from the US is that the most important sensor at the heart of this is the active electronically scanned radar, the APG-85 from Northrop Grumman. I read that program is way behind schedule and that Australia's F-35s will not be receiving the new radars for some time to come. That appears to be a very troubled subset of what's going on. And, I mean, it's a very delicate topic. Obviously, I won't be detailing specific vulnerabilities, and that would be irresponsible to do that. But I think it would be useful and in the public interest for Australians to have some sense of what is going on with the program, and especially, as I keep pointing out, given our overdependence on the United States for defense material. I think it's a highly relevant topic. I'll conclude on a foreign policy note by saying I also note that East Timor, Timor-Leste, is improving its relations with Russia. I've spoken previously about Russia, done my best to explain it remains a major Pacific power. I'll keep a close eye on that. That is a worrying development. And again, I keep on circling back to the fact, if we want to see Russia weakened, which I think is in everyone's strategic interests, provide more aid to Ukraine. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye for now, and see you next time.
Vantor delivers sovereign spatial intelligence so nations can own the ground truth. See how at vantor.com.